Today, I'm going to be showing you what region of D-City has introduced. So that means I'm going to be showing you the north, south, west, and east of D-City. And the north side of D-City has introduced us to the first ever building in this world and the beginning of skyscrapers itself. It also introduced us to the fast food restaurants, which is McDonald's. It also started the hotel industry, which is a big part in D-City. It gave us our first emergency services such as the hospital, the fire station, and last but not least, the police station. It was also the start of the bank in the world. It gave us a gas station which is furnished inside and outside. Also gave us a park very small, built back in 2019 if I remember. First ever retail store called IKEA, which is a real life store in the real world. Gave us our first entertainment in the world, which is the stadium, built by Matty Stahl himself. Gave us the movie theater and the radio station, which is another entertainment in the world. First ever company in the world called Pyramid Enterprise, which is a car dealership company. Another company called Bitcoin Enterprise, which is a banking company. And a third company in the world called Crypto, which is another banking company. It also introduced us to our first ever downtown called Downtown D, and it gave us our Subway and Nike, which is a clothing store and a fast food restaurant. Also gave us the map of the world, introduced us to our first ever Target, and it gave us the MHL, which is called the Minecraft Hockey League, created by Matty Stahl himself, and it gave us the beginning of parking ramps. The south side of D-City has introduced us to our first ever crappy apartments. It also gave us our first ever real housing from the real world. It's also gave us our first ever hand-built retail stores which are furnished inside and outside. It's also gave us our first ever pond in the world itself. It's also introduced us to D-City Got Talent, which is just like America's Got Talent. It's also introduced us to our new education system in the high school called DCHS, which is furnished inside and the outside. So, the west side of D-City has introduced us to our first ever S-Store Bill Stream, but it originally came from Pyramid, but this is the first one in D-City itself. It also introduced us to our first ever car dealership, owned by Pyramid Enterprise. Now, again, it was originally from Pyramid, but this is the first one in D-City. It's also introduced us to our Apple Store, which is a real-life store in the real world. Also introduced us to our newer, improved Target than the last one. It gave us our Capitol building, basically our own version of the White House. Also gave us our first ever public library, the only one in the world, so that's good. It also gave us our own entertainment, the golf course, which is playable. Gave us our Bank of D-City, owned by Bitcoin Enterprise, furnished inside. And it gave us our new biome of trees, which are spruce trees. And last but not least, our first ever middle school in D-City, the newer education. The east side of D-City has introduced us to our first ever news station called DCN, which stands for D-City News. It's also introduced us to our first ever elementary school called Jester Elementary. It's also showed us Lake Coral, which is our first ever lake in the world and the first ever water reservoir in D-City. Also showcased us the new downtown called New D-City. And as you can see on the top right, that building back there, it's called Complex Property. It's an insurance company, which is very new in D-City. It's also gave us the other new water reservoir, which is a river. It's also showed us the still being built park, but it will be finished in this month of January. It's also showing us our first ever Minecraft Baseball League, which is short for MBL. And our last but not least, the first ever museum in D-City.